Take care." Her voice was cold as she said those words, her face devoid of any maternal emotion. As she turned her back and walked away, 6-year-old me cried out loudly, trying to call her back. "Wait, don't go." I reached out and grabbed her index finger. She glared at me with a frightening expression as I pulled hard and forcefully yanked her finger out of my hand. Then, without paying any attention to me crying, she quickly walked away. She was wearing high heels, which she never usually wore, and the sharp click-clack sound seemed to echo her joyful heart. But to me, it sounded like something was breaking. That memory would become etched in my heart as a trauma towards women. The one who helped soothe those feelings of mine was her, who also carried a trauma towards men. Meeting her made me think for the first time that love was a good thing. My name is Gabe. I'm 26 years old and work as an architect. When I was 6, my mother fell in love with someone other than my father, divorced him, and left me behind to go to the man she loved. At age 6, you still want to be coddled by your mother. The memory of my mother leaving home is vividly imprinted in my heart. The more down I feel, the more I have dreams about that time. On the day my mother left home, I desperately chased after her. I cried and shouted, calling for her. I managed to grab her finger, but she coldly shook me off, and the sound of her heels stomping on the ground is stuck in my ears and won't leave. My father, who had been chasing after me, picked me up and we returned home. It's not because I miss her or feel lonely that I have that dream. I always have that dream when I get a new girlfriend. The person who was my mother fell in love with someone other than her husband and left me behind as she left home. She treated me, who was crying and chasing after her, with utter coldness. Now that I'm an adult, I think about how women immersed in romance can be this cold even towards her own child. So for me, romance is just a status thing. Walking around with a beautiful woman raises my value. That's what I've always thought. That's why I never stay with one woman for long. Without fail, they dump me with parting words like "you're just a pretty face" and we break up. That's the usual pattern. And the biggest issue is that I can't hold hands with women. That day, when my mother grabbed my hand and shook me off, I developed an aversion to women's hands. I realized this at an elementary school sports day, when I had to hold hands with a girl during a competition. Goosebumps ran all over my body. At the time, I endured it out of necessity, but when I got my first girlfriend and she suddenly grabbed my hand, I felt disgusted and nauseous. When I reflexively pulled my hand away, my girlfriend looked sad. I was vaguely aware that the cause of this was my mother's actions that day. Maybe this is a trauma from that time. If I could meet my mother and properly hold her hand, this trauma might be resolved. That's what I read on the internet when I first got a cell phone. But even so, I never wanted to see her. I don't feel like I hate her either. I've lived my life trying to erase her existence from my memory because I hate the thought of people thinking I care about my mother. Yet, as I grew older, people who knew my mother started telling me I was looking more and more like her. Even my father, who I think was hurt the most, said "you're good looking like your mom." That infuriated me to no end. Don't ever say I look like that woman again. I would always say that. My father would give her a smile and lightly apologize, saying sorry. From the age of 6, my father single-handedly raised me. He gave me more than twice the love of a mother and father combined. No less than any other kid. So I was furious at my own face for resembling the mother who betrayed such loving father. Because of that, I got fed up with women who complimented my face or confessed their love to me. Women will eventually betray you. Understanding that from my mother, I was cold towards romance. So I can understand loving someone from the bottom of my heart. Getting asked out, going out, treating them dismissively, them getting sick of it, breaking up. It was always a repetition of that. I never thought about wanting to change myself, and I didn't think I'd meet a woman who could change me. I graduated from college and started working as an architect at a mid-sized company. The reason I aimed to become an architect was because I wanted to create homes where loving families gather, something I never experienced myself. Without realizing it, I may have had a desire to create a warm family of my own, but I was afraid to say that out loud, because it would mean acknowledging that I still longed for a mother figure. So I've never told anyone the real reason I became an architect. Thanks to my face and personable nature, I was able to steadily secure contracts and enjoy my work. About 4 years after I started working, a certain woman joined a company. She wore glasses and a plain suit with flat shoes. Her makeup was so light, I couldn't even tell if she was wearing any. Her hair was pulled back in a single ponytail. She was probably beautiful, but had no charm. "I'm Catherine. Nice to meet you." She bowed her head without making eye contact with anyone. Just because we were the same age, I ended up being paired with Catherine. "I'm Gabe. Nice to meet ya." I flash a smile. Women are weak to this smile of mine anyway. If they don't fall for it, then they're not interested in men. The guy would be totally rejected. "Nice to meet you." But Catherine didn't change her expression one bit. Finding that strange, I continue with small talk. "Why did you quit your previous job?" Catherine's eyes widened and she looked straight at me. The moment our eyes met for the first time, she immediately looked down and silently said nothing. Sorry. Did I ask something unnecessary?" I was a little flustered. She was completely different from any woman I had met before. After that, the two of us started working together. If I spoke to her, she would respond, but she never went out of her way to talk to me and seemed to avoid the male employees. But she was very capable at her job, and I could really rely on her. If we were going to work together, I tried to break the ice by bringing up various topics and making idle conversation, but Catherine would only say things like yes or no. Something about that lit a fire in me. I would definitely make her pay attention to me. At first, it stemmed from my pride. The first job the two of us took on was a renovation job for the head of a wealthy family. The son was getting married, and we were asked to turn the large detached house into a home for 2 generations to live in. After that, we drew up plans over and over and exchanged ideas with Catherine. When we presented our joint proposal to the client, they were extremely pleased, and we secured a major contract, which earned us high praise from our superiors. At that time, when the head of the household asked to shake hands, I returned the handshake with both hands. But when Catherine was asked the same, she carefully wiped her hands with a handkerchief before returning the handshake. It wasn't really something to be concerned about, but her behavior caught my attention. However, with the job going well, I spoke in a slightly elated tone. "Catherine, good work. It's a relief the job went well. I feel like all our hard work in refining the proposal paid off. Want to celebrate?" You know, I had never shaken hands for getting a contract. But does this happen often for you, Catherine? When I asked that question, she looked startled and said, I mean, you were wiping your hands. It seemed like you were showing respect to the other person. It's not something that happens often, so I just reflexively returned the handshake. Was that not good? After saying that, I was feeling elated, but I glanced over to check if talking to her this much was a bother. Sure enough, she was looking down. Catherine rarely responds to things other than work. So at that time too, I was talking without really expecting anything. But she started speaking in a small voice. "Oh, I sweat a lot from my hands. So if I touch them without wiping them, the other person might find it unpleasant." That was her answer. They say your hands get sweaty when you're nervous or something. I replied nonchalantly, but Catherine gave off an air of not wanting to say anything more. Thanks to successfully completing a big job, we were able to finish work on time for once in a long while. "Catherine, aren't you going home?" I call out to Catherine, who is working on her computer. "No, I still have a bit of work left." She stops typing and answers me. "I see. Well, see ya." I raise my hand to say goodbye to Catherine, and she gives a small nod and says good work today. On a day like that, I end up having to go back to the office because I forgot something. Many people have gone home on time, so the office is quiet. In front of the room where my desk is located, there's a vending machine and a small break area. There, Catherine was staring intently at her phone with a coffee in hand. She had her phones in her ears, so I couldn't hear anything, but her eyes were sparkling. She was smiling happily, and her cheeks were flushed pink. I absent-mindedly watched her face go through various expressions. So she makes faces like that. I avert my eyes, feeling like I've seen something I shouldn't, but I can't help sneaking glances, filled with the conflicting emotions of finally finding a treasure I've been searching for. Without noticing me watching, Catherine looks extremely happy as she gazes at her phone. I become really curious about what is being shown on that phone screen, and quietly approach so she won't notice me. Peeking over her shoulder, What was displayed on the phone was a handsome man. A handsome man, but one from an anime. Is it some kind of mobile game app? I'm not too familiar with it since it's my first time seeing it, but I've seen ads for games where you raise handsome men to your liking. Is Catherine raising a handsome man she likes in that game? Wanting to get an even closer look at that screen, I get close enough to Catherine's ear that she can almost feel my breath and peer at her phone screen. I get so fixated on her phone that I don't realize how close I am to the chair. My foot gets caught on the chair and I almost trip, reflexively grabbing Catherine's shoulder. The startled Catherine lets out a loud eek and jumps up from her seat. I had gotten too close to her, so when she stands up, her head powerfully collides with my chin. Ow! I crumple to the ground, face down. What are you doing? Her voice was almost a scream. Catherine immediately turns off her phone screen and stares at me, crumpled on the ground, with a look of concern, but also like I'm some kind of suspicious person. She starts getting ready to go home, avoiding eye contact with me. The pain subsides a bit and I stand up. I apologize for startling her and bring up what she was looking at on her phone. Sorry. You looked like you were having fun, so I thought it might be your boyfriend. What was that? As if not wanting to say anything, Catherine doesn't try to answer my attempts at conversation. I want to talk with you about stuff other than work, Catherine. Is that not a good thing? I mean, we're work partners, so I think it's fine for us to talk about each other. I tried to get her attention by using the slightly spoiled voice I normally use. Most women should fall for me with this. That's what I always thought. But that tactic didn't work on Catherine. On the contrary, my words seemed to flip some switch in Catherine, and her face clearly changed. Catherine, who always had a serious expression, let her emotions show and lashed out at me. What do you know about me? You want to know what I was enjoying? This is my heart's refuge. Real men only say cruel things to me when they know the real me, but he in my phone always has kind words for me, no matter when. So talking to real men for anything other than work is more than enough. Catherine's face was bright red and she was out of breath from talking so passionately. I don't know what trauma you have with men, but not every guy is the same, okay? As I said those words, I was struck by the thought that they could just as easily be directed at myself. Then Catherine grabbed my right hand with both of hers. At that moment, I felt a clammy sensation on my right hand and goosebumps ran down my spine. Whoa! I cried out, startled by both her suddenly grabbing my hand and that sensation. Catherine glared at me with tears welling up in her eyes and said, "Men are all disgusted by it." Spitting those words out, Catherine picked up her things and quickly left the break room. I had heard her with my thoughtless words and could only stand there stunned. I didn't even chase after her and dejectedly walked home. I couldn't get Catherine's tear-stricken face out of my head and kept worrying about her trauma with men. When I got home, I took out my phone while looking at the right hand she had grabbed and decided to do some research. Searching for sweaty palms, terms like primary hyperhidrosis and mental hyperhidrosis came up. Primary is when your palms sweat, and mental hyperhidrosis is when your palms sweat from nervousness or stress. Even if sweat seeps out a little, it may not be to the extreme degree that Catherine experiences. I regretted blurting out "whoa" when she grabbed my hand. Is Catherine angry at my reaction? If I go to work tomorrow, will she not talk to me anymore? Until I went to sleep, I couldn't stop worrying about what Catherine thought. But at the same time, I realized there were feelings inside me that I had never experienced before. What's gotten into me? Worrying about her? I asked myself. Until now, I never really cared what women thought of me. Could it be that I'm concerned about Catherine? I started wondering to myself. I had never felt this way before. It's like the feeling of a middle school student agonizing over their first love. I felt a little happy realizing I too could have these feelings. I decided that when I saw her tomorrow, the first thing I'd do is apologize. With that in mind, I fell asleep. The next day, I arrived at work earlier than usual, feeling restless. Looking around the office, I saw Catherine at her desk. Mustering my courage, I approached her and spoke. Hey Catherine. Good morning. About yesterday. As I started to speak, she stopped moving her hands and looked at me. Good morning. I was out of line yesterday. After saying just that, she turned her eyes back to her computer screen and resumed working. Unable to say anything more, I went and sat at my own desk. That day, the two of us were scheduled to go to a client's site together. The weather forecast said it'd be sunny today. Let's take shelter from the rain over there for a bit. When we left the office, the weather was nice, but we were suddenly caught in a heavy downpour. Pointing to a retro-looking cafe, I went inside with Catherine. After we sat down and I was brushing off my wetsuit, Catherine swiftly held out a towel to me. Here, it's still new. She waited expressionlessly for me to take the towel. No, it's yours, so use it for yourself. I'm fine. When I declined, Catherine put the towel on the table and showed me the inside of her bag. As you can see, I carry plenty of towels, along with documents and such. Her bag was stuffed with more towels than seemed necessary to carry around. Then I'll borrow it. Thanks. Do you carry that many every day? I thought I was asking a perfectly normal question. It's unusual, isn't it? Most people don't see someone carrying around this many. But I go through this whole amount of towels every single day. To keep from getting sweat on documents, to avoid grossing people out if they happen to touch my hand. I felt like I had asked about something I shouldn't have. Just then, the cafe waitress brought over some water. We haven't had lunch yet. Want to get something to eat? I handed Catherine the menu. Well, it all looks so good. What should I get? In that moment, she seemed like a regular girl. Which one looks good to you? I leaned in as if to peek at the menu. This omelet. I love omelet. I love eating it and making it myself. And he and my game grew to my tastes and likes omelet too. As she said that, her face turned bright red and she hid it behind the menu. I thought Catherine seemed very passionate when talking about her game. Like a different person, she showed the face of a little girl compared to when she was working. Omelet, huh? I used to love it, but now it's too much of a hassle to make, so I haven't eaten it in a while. I deliberately didn't bring up her game and only talked about the topic of omelet. In the end, Catherine ordered the omelet and I ordered pasta. As we ate, I ended up asking about her game. So you were listening after all. I thought maybe you didn't hear me. She set down the spoon she was holding on her plate and covered her face with her hands. Sorry, I don't think there's anything wrong with being obsessed with a game, but I was wondering if you had any interest in real-life romance. Upon hearing that, Catherine uncovered her face and clearly answered me. I have no interest in real-life romance. As she declared that, I became curious about her past relationships. But you've had boyfriends before, right? Catherine stopped her hand that was about to bring a bite of omelet to her mouth and answered my question. I've been in relationships too. But like I said before, this hyperhidrosis reveals people's ugly sides. Even if we're dating, if we hold hands, before I know it their hand is soaked too. If I fold some clothes, they get wet. No one wants a woman like that. In the end, they say gross and dump me. So I've given up on real-world romance. Catherine said that clearly, with a refreshingly serene expression. What if someone showed up who said they don't mind not holding hands or that it doesn't bother them? I felt like my feelings towards women were starting to change. I dated women without any expectations and thinking serious relationships were meaningless. I was confident Catherine would end up falling for my face eventually, but she never showed any sign of that. On the contrary, she'd introduce me to her game boyfriend. Proof she doesn't see me as a romantic prospect. I noticed I was gradually becoming absorbed in this woman unlike any I'd had before. I intended to manipulate her feelings, but before I knew it, my own heart was being manipulated. But I want to hold hands with the person I like. And there's the option of surgery, but I haven't met anyone I'd want to go that far for, so I've given up. Just as I was about to say then what about me? Catherine turned to face the window where light was streaming in, cutting off my words. Looks like the rain stopped. All right, shall we get back to work? She hurriedly paid the bill and went outside. I ended up taking the towel I borrowed from Catherine home with me. When I washed it and returned it to her, she said with a surprised look, anyone else would have found it gross and thrown it out, but you even washed it for me. Thank you. You're odd, Gabe. After that exchange, I asked her. Odd. Catherine nodded with a slight smile and replied, I thought after hearing my story, you'd be grossed out and distance yourself from me. I mean, a woman grinning at her game boyfriend. Saying that, she laughed. The next day, she brought a homemade omelet for lunch, saying it was to thank me. Homemade food is gross, right? After you listened to me go on and on, I got carried away and did this. When I saw the omelet Catherine showed me, my expression must have been quite grim. I made her think I was feeling unpleasant. I took the lunchbox from Catherine as she was about to put it away, and took a bite of the omelet. It's delicious. Eating an omelet for the first time in 20 years, I unknowingly shed tears. Huh? What's wrong with it? Catherine was flustered by my reaction. No, Catherine. I just thought. Eating an omelet for the first time in 20 years, it really is tasty. She tilted her head, listening to my story. Actually, I have a trauma with women too. 20 years ago, my mother cheated on my dad and they got divorced. Ever since she shook off my hand when I grabbed her and begged her not to go, I've hated having my hand held by women. When you grabbed my hand that time, Catherine, I only cried out because of that knee-jerk reaction. My mom used to make omelets a lot and I loved it. But after she left, omelets felt like a symbol of my mother and I couldn't eat it anymore. But it really is delicious. With tears streaming down my face, I ate up every last bit of the omelet in the lunchbox without stopping. I'm sorry, I didn't know your situation, Catherine said, looking apologetic. Catherine, I fought with her. I could have a different kind of relationship than before. So just as I was about to convey my feelings, Catherine's phone rang. Sorry, it's my mom. Saying that, she answered. Next to her, I overheard words like blind date and marriage in her conversation. After hanging up, Catherine looked a bit angry and said, "Geez, is everything okay with your mom?" From the words I overheard, I had a bad feeling and was curious about the content of the conversation, so I asked, "I'm sorry for interrupting our conversation. My mom wants me to get married soon. So she was asking if there's a day next month I can come home for a blind date she set up. I'm not interested in relationships, so marriage is even more impossible." I had to say it now. I was determined. Turn down that blind date. Perhaps not hearing me over the sound of people talking, Catherine asked me to repeat myself. "I want you to turn down that meeting with your blind date." This time I answered in a louder voice than before. "Huh?" Catherine let out a surprised voice. I was never serious about relationships. I never fell in love for real, and always thought I'd end up being betrayed. But when you said you'd given up, I felt like I really wanted you to know that love isn't as bad as we think. Because when you were looking at your game boyfriend, Catherine, you were so darn cute. That's because you turned to him for comfort and love him, right? Then love isn't all bad things. Even I thought, romance, huh? But somehow, I don't know why, but I started wanting you to experience a good relationship, Catherine. I naturally started feeling that way. So don't go on any blind dates. Will you? And as I said that, I grabbed Catherine's hand. She tried to pull away her sweaty hand so I wouldn't hold it, but this time I grabbed her hand firmly so she couldn't shake me off, and clearly conveyed to her, "Only you can help me overcome my trauma, Catherine. And I'll definitely make you overcome yours. Will you go out with me?" Looking straight into Catherine's eyes, I poured out my feelings to her. Catherine, about to accept those words, said this after a few seconds. "Let's overcome our traumas together." With a clear, bright face like the sun, she showed me a smile. I felt that face was her true self, not the constantly serious Catherine until now. "All right." I made a big fist pump. I had never felt this way before. As I hugged her tight and jumped for joy, Catherine whispered in my ear, "Gotta say goodbye to my game boyfriend now." The two of us laughed together. I squeezed her hand tight, vowing in my heart to never let go again. I found myself wanting to hear what kind of sound her heels would make as she walked, if she ever wore high heels.